Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Every government loves repatriation. It sounds humane, tidy. It sounds like people are going back to something stable, familiar, and safe. In reality, for millions of Afghans, going home means being dropped into a country many barely know, ruled by a regime that restricts their lives, and suffering an economy that cannot employ them. That's why on this episode, we're looking at what happens when neighboring states decide that refugees are no longer their problem and solve it by making them Afghanistan's problem again. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end with people quietly rebuilding their lives, but overcrowded cities, raising rents, and the slow manufacturing of the next migration crisis. But first, here's a look at our latest report to find out more.
More than 4,300 citizens of Afghanistan crossed back into their country from Iran and Pakistan on February 18th alone. Taliban authorities said 449 were deported from Iran, while nearly 3,918 returned from Pakistan. The figures are stark, but they are not unusual. According to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, more than 3.6 million Afghanistan returned from Iran in 2025 alone, including around 1.2 million deportees. In total, over 5.2 million people came back from Iran and Pakistan between January and late November 2025. Iran accounted for nearly two-thirds of all returns. The scale reflects how deeply intertwined Iran and Afghanistan are. Iran, home to around 92 million people, hosts the largest Afghanistani diaspora in the world. For decades, Afghanistanis have crossed the long-shared border to escape war, poverty, and political repression, from the Soviet invasion to Taliban rule and the aftermath of the 2021 withdrawal of U.S. forces. Many who settled in Iran built lives in its cities rather than in state-run settlements. They worked in construction and domestic labor, sought medical care, and sent their children to school. For some young Afghanistani women and girls barred from education beyond grade 6 at home, Iran offered a rare chance to study. Yet their status has always been fragile. During the 2025 confrontation between Iran and Israel, authorities accused some Afghanistanis of acting as foreign agents and increased deportations. The economic strain caused by sanctions against Iran and internal unrest has added further pressure. As international tensions rise and figures such as Donald Trump again raise the prospect of military escalation with Tehran, Afghanistanis in Iran face renewed uncertainty. For millions who have already endured decades of displacement, another shock to the region would not be abstract geopolitics. It would be one more upheaval in lives defined by forced movement.
And now, let's zone in on the east-planning portion of our show. Iran is not the only country to have expelled a substantial number of Afghani citizens. Pakistan has also treated them as a political tool in the context of ongoing border dispute with Afghanistan. Tensions between Pakistan and Taliban-run Afghanistan have flared yet again this week, with fresh exchanges of fire along their shared border just days after Pakistani airstrikes inside Afghan territory. As always, here's a closer look.
Both sides blame each other for the escalation. In Islamabad, government officials accused Taliban forces of initiating unprovoked fire near the Torkham crossing, saying Pakistan's military responded swiftly. The skirmishes follow Pakistani strikes on Sunday in several Afghanistani provinces. The UN mission in Afghanistan said at least 13 civilians were killed. Taliban authorities put the death toll at 18 and rejected Pakistan's claim that more than 80 militants were targeted. At the core of the dispute is security. Islamabad accuses the Taliban government of failing to curb armed groups that launch attacks inside Pakistan, including a suicide bombing at a mosque in the Pakistani capital on February 6th. Islamabad also claims its air raids against Afghanistan targeted militant camps and hideouts. Kabul rejects this claim, saying that religious schools and residential homes were hit, causing civilian casualties. With mistrust deepening and communication strained, such incidents risk escalating quickly along one of the region's most volatile frontiers.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Millions of Afghans are being sent home to a country governed by a regime most of the world does not recognize and struggling to survive in an economy that's crippled by sanctions. Over the past year, nearly 3 million Afghans have been deported from Pakistan and Iran. Some left as toddlers, some were born abroad. Some have spent decades building lives, families, and businesses, only to be told, hey, time to go back to the place you fled from in the first place. A huge number of these returnees are funneling into Jalalabad, a city near the border whose population has doubled in 2 years. Rents, of course, have doubled too. If you thought inflation was bad where you live, imagine competing for housing with tens of thousands of desperate families arriving every month. The local economy is developing the exact profile you'd expect from a sudden demographic shock. More mouth, fewer jobs, higher rents, lower wages. And all of this happening under the government of the Taliban, a regime that returned to power in 2021 and immediately set about building an economy based on three pillars: isolation, sanctions, and policies that sideline half the population. This is the context into which millions of people are being dumped. The humanitarian system is buckling. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is warning that many of these people will not stay. When you deport people into poverty, instability, and political repression, they become migrants again. The route is predictable: back towards Iran, through Turkey, and onward to Europe if they survive the journey and the border regimes. In other words, mass deportations today are manufacturing the refugee flows of tomorrow. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. Afghanistan is still reeling from earthquakes, collapsing aid budgets, and regional tensions that keep boiling over into violence. For women especially, the perspectives are the most terrible. Many women who worked or studied in Iran and Pakistan return with skills, education, and professional expectations, only to find that most of the jobs they trained for are now off limits. There's also a cruel irony in the fact that returnees often bring back skills Afghanistan desperately needs: tech literacy, business practices, marketing, even sports culture. Some of the country's most globally competitive sectors were built in exile. The national cricket team itself grew out of refugee camps. And yet, highly educated returnees are selling chickens because their degrees are worthless in an economy that doesn't think it needs engineers. So let's be honest about what is happening. Pakistan and Iran are exporting a humanitarian problem. Sending millions of people back to a country that cannot absorb them safely is not orderly migration management. And the bill, as usual, will be paid later with interest. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Marcin Krzyżanowski, Middle East expert from Jagiellonian University. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation.
So today we are exploring the return of Afghans back to the country. Now we're looking at a very large scale, and to be fair, the language is a little bit confusing because return would sound like it's voluntary, but in some cases it doesn't seem to be that case as well. Can you help us break down the scale of these returns and how much of it is actually voluntary and how much of it is because of the deportation from various different countries?
Those return, or to be more precise, deportations, because Pakistan and Afghanistan were forcibly deported Afghan citizens from their territory, is a massive in scale. Approximately 1.5 million, at least, people were forcibly returned to Afghanistan. Some estimations are saying that it is closer to 2 million, but in my opinion, 1.5 is closer to the reality.
Right, and can you help us understand what's the reasoning behind that? Because as I understood, it's not just Pakistan, but other countries as well, all of accumulating at a very similar timeline.
Yes, the two main countries involved are Pakistan, which started the whole process, and it was followed closely by Iran. Both countries justified their action by security reasons. According to Pakistani government, the Afghans in Pakistan were involved in terrorist activities and were a threat to the internal security of the state. The Iranian government said a pretty similar story, but in their case, Afghans were accused of being spies and sabotagists paid by Mossad during and before 12 days war, and justified by the security reasons, the deportation process is still on.
And how legitimate do you think these concerns are, or do you believe there are any sort of political, geopolitical, or other reasons due to these deportations?
The justifications in both cases is only partially true. Afghans were involved in terrorist activities in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, but the issue of citizenship of Afghanistan and Pakistan is, let's to say, very problematic, especially in northwestern Pashtun inhabited areas. In case of Iran, there were no conclusive proofs presented of Afghans being involved in activities against Iran, although it was for sure easier to conscript to hire low-class citizens in Iran. As I said, still there was no conclusive proofs presented.
Right, and both of these countries have been deporting Afghans roughly the same time around the 2025, and of course accumulated to millions of people being displaced at the same time. Do you think that there is a coordinated timeline, or is it more pure coincidence?
Poor coincidence. There was no coordination between Pakistan and the Iranian governments on that issue. The timeline was pure coincidence, as I said, and the reason why that time was chosen are pretty obscure to the rest of the world.
Right, but of course, like you mentioned, there's, depending on estimates, of 1.5 million to 2 million, and depending on the publication, some even put the number closer to 3 million as well. Whichever way it is, it's a very large number going back to the country at the same time. How do you see that impacting the societal structure within Afghanistan, and do you think that they have any measures in order to accommodate all these people flooding in?
Afghanistan was in the state of economic crisis even before those deportations, and an influx of such huge number of people harmed Afghan economy even more. In some areas where the temporary camps were places, there was a problem with food distribution and the scarcity of water. In addition to that, in the long term, influx of 1.5 million at least people will create additional number of unemployed people, as the Afghan economy is unable to absorb such huge number of potential workers.
But is there an argument to be made that these people coming back to the country could replenish some of its labor force or add to the economy in any way, shape, or form?
There was such an argument, but in reality, Afghan economy is too weak, is too little in scale to absorb such huge number.
And do you think there's a possibility that all these re-immigrations will have impact on the culture and societal, even political impact within the country?
Definitely, especially because of aforementioned economical reasons. The huge rate of unemployment is a threat to Afghan society. People simply have no money to live and no perspective. In such circumstances, the fate of the future governments is uncertain.
And how do you think neighboring countries are viewing these re-immigration efforts, be it Afghanistan or even Pakistan and Iran? Do you think that they will start to pursue similar policies?
I don't think so. As in the rest of the countries, neighboring countries, the number of Afghan citizens, Afghan refugees, is relatively small, and most of them integrated well into the societies. So only Iran and Pakistan are on the front of the deportations process.
What about the neighbors of Afghanistan that has been, well, not been accommodating that many Afghan refugees? Do you see it also being worried about any potential spillover?
Definitely. Afghanistan is still a kind of unstable country, prone to all kinds of crises at the moment. On the surface, everything is okay, but metaphorically speaking, there will be one day when the pot will erupt and boiling water will be spilled over the region. The most interesting case is Tajikistan, which was an arena of civil war in the 90s and early 21st century, and still it is prone to Islamic, to jihadists and jihadi terrorists. Other countries are more secure, but also looking on Afghanistan very carefully.
And recently, Pakistan has declared open war in Afghanistan. Do you think that this is going to change the calculus? Is going to change everything?
Maybe not everything, but will change a lot. For sure, the persecution against Afghans in Pakistan will be even bigger and harder. Afghan economy will also be hit, as if Pakistan will close the border, Afghanistan will be effectively cut out from the foreign trade, except those trade routes from Iran and Central Asia, which are not sufficient to sustain Afghan economy. So Afghanistan may face a huge economical crisis in the near future.
Right, and like you said, with all the economic crisis, the people flooding in, it does look like a pressure cooker about to blow. Talking about the spillover effect, do you see any potential where these people would also be going into Western countries such as Europe?
Fortunately for Europe, Afghanistan is a distant country, and the neighboring countries are barring Afghans from entering on their territories. So we are not endangered by mass influx of refugees. But the crisis in Afghanistan may result in an increasing number of Islamist terrorists in the region, and by that it can affect the security of Europe.
Can you help us unpack that a little bit? Like you mentioned, increasing the number of terrorists. Do you think that it's cells that already exist in some of these Western countries might be mobilized, or do you see more movements around the globe?
At the moment, it's not an imminent threat, but as I said, a lot of young people without any perspectives and with little or even no education are the best recruits for the jihadi organizations. And still, there is a threat of re-emerging a strong Islamic State of Khorasan province in Afghanistan, and various other terrorist organizations, as still Al-Qaeda, are also active in the area.
All right, so we'll have to see how this ripple effect is going to take shape. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Kenyan police have arrested a suspected recruiter accused of sending more than 1,000 Kenyans to join the Russian army. Many of the recruited Kenyans were reportedly deployed to fight in Ukraine.
Kenya's Directorate of Criminal Investigation said 33-year-old Festus Amwamba was detained near the Ethiopian border and charged. He is alleged to have founded a company named Global Face Human Resources, a recruitment agency used to channel Kenyans to Russia under false promises of civilian jobs. Some recruits reportedly had no military background and were forced to sign army contracts upon arrival. The case comes as Russia's State Duma passed a bill shielding foreign nationals who enlist in the military from extradition to their home countries if they face criminal charges. The measure, pending approval by the Federation Council and Vladimir Putin, would also apply to those who have already completed their service.
Russian intelligence services have built a network of properties across Western Europe, according to a report by The Telegraph. citing European security officials. Authorities say the sites could be used for future acts of sabotage.
That there might be a larger
The properties include summer houses, warehouses, churches, and even small islands located by military and civilian infrastructure in more than a dozen countries. Some officials fear certain locations may already store drones, weapons, or explosives. Reported acquisitions include cabins overlooking Norway's Bardufoss air base and properties near naval facilities in mainland Greece. In Sweden, a Russian Orthodox church built near a strategic airport was later assessed by intelligence services as a potential platform for espionage.
Georgia's ruling Georgian Dream Party has introduced draft amendments that would criminalize the systemic non-recognition of the government. Critics say the move could further restrict political dissent.
The changes would increase penalties for actions deemed aimed at rejecting Georgia's constitutional order or state institutions. Convictions could carry prison sentences of up to 3 years. The wording leaves broad room for interpretation and could apply to calls for civil disobedience or challenges to the disputed October 2024 parliamentary elections. The legislative push comes as Western pressure mounts. The United Kingdom recently sanctioned 2 Georgian broadcasters, accusing them of spreading misleading narratives about Russia's war in Ukraine.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.